Hello, everyone. I've got about 5 minutes since this is what the screen recording software lets me do. So we're going to go in small chunks. That also makes it easier to get through these things. You don't have to watch the whole thing. And we're going to talk about how stars die and how the elements that make up everything that you can see, how they're produced. All right. And so where we left off is basically stars. They uh, form a life cycle. After they leave the main sequence, you get red giants and you get dwarves. And they leave remnants that we can see, and they're the pretty things. So here's lots of pretty images. And so we're going to talk about basically how do we divide up what's going on? All right, is we got small stars, we got big stars. They don't live the same way. And essentially, what matters is the mass. The more mass that there is, the faster the life cycle of the star, and the more energetic life cycle. High mass gives you high core temperature, fast fusion, that sort of stuff. Right, and so we're going to divide up things into, you know, there's low mass stars, which we'll talk about, and they kind of just get big. They go red giant, and then they become white dwarfs. There's some intermediate stuff, which makes up heavier elements, and then there's high mass stars, which blow up. And there are brown dwarfs, and the brown dwarfs don't go through this because they don't start fusion. So some of the very smallest stars that do fuse don't necessarily go through this, and you can look that up on this is just a basic understanding of what's going on. And we're figuring all this out from looking at star clusters. When we look at star clusters, all these stars are about the same age in the image, but you'll notice there's a lot of yellow ones and a lot of blue ones. The blue ones still have hydrogen, and the red ones, which are about the same brightness, they are stars that are becoming red giants. And so they're running out of fuel at this time. All right. And so this is what happens. Stars will stay on the main sequence as long as there's hydrogen to fuse into helium. The life cycle changes when it runs out. And that's only going to be about 10% of the hydrogen in the star. Most of this hydrogen doesn't fuse. Right? And what we see from the evolution of stars is that they become large red and more luminous as time runs out. As their hydrogen runs out, whatever the process is has to make it a larger and more luminous and red star. All right, and we see that in all sorts of different masses. No matter what the mass is, the same sort of trend happens. You get the same sort of increase in luminosity and decrease in temperature, which is you're turning red. Right. And we see this in this image of a cluster, a red star that's a red giant amongst a bunch of bluer stars. So, what happens when the hydrogen runs out? And we're talking about small stars here. Small stars, under a couple solar masses. The core runs out of hydrogen. That means it stops fusing. There's less energy. It cools off. And that cooling off is going to result in a contraction. The outer parts of the star also contract in, and eventually you're left with a core of helium. And that core of helium is shrinking down, and the outside layers are heating up as they're in falling. Some of that outer layer is going to start fusing. Right? But this is not going to be a stable way for the star to fuse. All right. As the core contracts, you get what's called a shell of hydrogen fusing. You get shell fusion. And that's not stable. You end up with this production of energy that causes the outer layers to expand, but the core is still contracting. And I will pause there.